Certainly one of the most common things you do in Excel when working with formulas is rather than putting in a formula repeatedly across or down multiple cells, we enter a formula once, as in the example here, a simple little formula to subtract the cells, and then we copy the formula. Now, whether you have used the word or not, most copying of formulas in Excel involves the idea of a relative copy. This formula literally says K2 minus K3. When we copy a formula, we copy it relatively unless we take steps to do otherwise. Meaning we don't want to see the formula K2 minus K3 here. It wouldn't make any sense. We'd have the same answer as this. It's not true. We automatically get a feature called relative copying, meaning the column letters have been adjusted. If we move one column to the right, our column references have been adjusted by 1. If we had somehow moved this down and to the right, the row references would have become adjusted also. Wouldn't make sense in this context. And so whether we say the words or not, relative copying is what we do most of the time in Excel. But obviously there are situations when this is not going to work for us. And certainly one common example is the situation we see in column C here. We want to put in new sales here based on a projection where we think, or we hope at least, everybody's sales are going to grow by 3%. And to make this a little bit more interesting, in column F, we've got a total right here of all the entries in column B, the actual sales, and then in column G, although it's empty right now, the reference, this refers to column C, the empty column C for the moment. And this is simply a calculation between the difference because we want to see how much we've grown. At least we hope so. Based on 3%, of course, we will. So a simple little formula here to show the new sales is the actual sales of this year times this percent, and then we'll simply add that on to the original amount. So this is one of 3 or 4 different ways to write this formula. And we may or may not want to keep the pennies, but let's say we do for now. We might not want to show them, so on the Home tab, we'll simply decrease the decimals twice. There we go. The real totals are there, by the way. And to copy these down the column, well, before doing that, we should do what? Check out a few of these. Just make sure our formula is working okay. And immediately we see that it's not. These are the same. Only the first one has changed. So what's happened? Here's our original formula. If we copy this formula from row 2 to row 3, the references to the row numbers all change. These 2's will change, and this will change. And sure enough, if we look right here, I'm double-clicking, the 2's became 3's. The 1 that was up here becomes a 2, and the percentage supposedly is coming out of E2, but there's nothing there. And I think you know for sure it would be a lousy solution to have to copy the 3% into all of these cells here. What we really need here is something called an absolute reference. We do not want the reference to E1 to change at all. We don't want it to be a relative reference. We want this to be absolute. And we can either type $ or press F4. Now, when you're doing this, you can click after the address, in front of it, between the two, or highlight all of this. And we could have done this, or you could have done this right after typing this in the original formula. Let's press F4. By no means is this intuitive. It just automatically puts in the $, which has nothing to do with currency. It simply means if we copy this formula, this reference does not change. You could say that it doesn't mean anything until we do copying. I'm pressing Control-Enter here so that the active cell does not move. I'll drag this down a couple of cells just to check it out. Looks like that's working. How's this one look? There we go. The reference is to cell E1 and will be repeatedly as we copy this anywhere. And the fast way to copy this down the column is to double-click. And by the way, every time you do this too, it's a good idea to press Control period a couple of times to see how far this got copied. You probably know your data ahead of time to know how far it should be copied. This simply confirms it. Control period moves the active cell around the corners of the highlighted range. This is an absolute address. We absolutely have to have it here, if you pardon the pun. There's no other way to do this sensibly. And you'll see absolute references needed in many, many different Excel worksheets. It's one of the basic things we need to know about formulas before copying them, an absolute reference.